We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because... Stop. Stop letting the ghosts of the 1960s hypnotize you. That speech gives us all goosebumps. It defines a generation of heroes. But NASA knows this, and they are weaponizing your nostalgia. They are selling you a sequel to Apollo, packaged with cinematic trailers and orchestral music. But this isn't a blockbuster, it is a cash grab. The reality is, the only thing they are truly launching right now is your tax money, straight into a black hole of bureaucratic incompetence. They call it Artemis. It is marketed as humanity's triumphant return to the lunar surface, a new era of exploration. But peel back the glossy sticker and look at the receipts. $93 billion. Let that sink in. That is the Inspector General's estimated price tag through 2025. And that is before we even establish a permanent foothold, before we mine a single gram of ice. We are burning a fortune just to recreate a mission profile we accomplished with slide rules 50 years ago. The uncomfortable truth? This isn't a space program designed for the future. This is a federal jobs program, disguised as exploration. We aren't innovating, we are scavenging. We are building a rocket using museum-era technology. Engines designed in the 70s, tanks derived from the 80s, to fly a mission that makes zero engineering sense in the 21st century. It is a Frankenstein monster, kept alive by lobbying, not physics. Built for a price? That would make a defense contractor blush. The media calls it historic. Physics calls it unsustainable. And today, we are going to stop being polite. We are going to dismantle the $93 billion lie, Bolt by Rusty Bolt, meat. The Space Launch System, the SLS, NASA marketing calls it the most powerful rocket ever built. They call it the flagship of American ingenuity. But strip away the patriotic paint, turn off the orchestral music, and look at the blueprints. You realize you have seen this before. This is not a new rocket. This is a Frankenstein monster, stitched together from the rotting corpse of the Space Shuttle era. That giant orange fuel tank? It's just a stretched version of the external tank we used in the 80s. Those white boosters on the side? They are the same solid fuel technology that we should have abandoned 30 years ago. Once you light them, you cannot turn them off. You just hang on and pray. It is technology from a time when grandfathers were children, repackaged as the future. But the real crime, the true act of engineering vandalism, is happening at the bottom of the core stage. Look at the engines. The RS-25. These aren't just engines. These are masterpieces. They are the Ferraris of rocket propulsion. Designed in the 1970s, they are widely considered the most efficient or most complex liquid fuel engines ever built by human hands. They were designed with one singular, holy purpose: to be reused, to go to space, come home, get cleaned up, and fly again. Some of the specific engines strapped to the Artemis rockets actually flew on shuttle missions decades ago. They have serial numbers. They have histories. In a way, they have souls. And what is NASA's plan for these engineering legends? For Artemis, NASA is taking these reusable masterpieces, strapping them to a disposable fuel tank, lighting them up for 8 minutes, and then dropping them. Into the Atlantic Ocean, we are taking museum-grade artifacts and turning them into artificial reefs. Every time an SLS launches, 4 of these engines, worth $100 million each, are sacrificed to the saltwater. They are gone, forever. Imagine buying a fleet of vintage Ferrari 250 GTOS. Imagine driving them to the grocery store just once, to pick up a carton of milk and then pushing them off a cliff. That is the logic of the space launch system. It is an insult to engineering efficiency. It is a tragedy of waste. So why? Why use 40-year-old technology that costs 10 times more than a modern reusable rocket? Because efficiency was never the goal. Employment was. The SLS uses old parts because it keeps the old supply chains alive. It keeps the factories in Alabama humming. It keeps the contractors in Utah paid. It keeps the voters in specific congressional districts happy. This rocket wasn't designed by engineers to explore the cosmos. It was designed by senators to win elections. It distributes tax dollars across all 50 states like a massive metallic stimulus package. NASA calls it the Space Launch System, but in the cynical hallways of Washington, the critics have a more accurate name for it: the Senate Launch System. And while the Senate is busy patting itself on the back, physics is preparing to hand us the bill. But bad engineering is manageable. We can fix leaks. We can update software. But bad economics, that is fatal. To understand why Artemis is bleeding NASA dry, you have to understand the mechanism of the wound. It's called cost plus contracting. Here is how the real world works. If you hire a contractor to build a house for $100,000 and they take 5 years longer than expected, they lose money. They get fired. That is called accountability. But in the world of old space, the world of Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman, that logic is inverted. Under a cost-plus contract, NASA agrees to pay the contractor for all their expenses, plus a guaranteed profit percentage on top. Think about the psychology of that. If you are Boeing and you are building the SLS core stage, what is your incentive to finish early? 0. In fact, you are financially penalized for being efficient. If you finish the rocket today, the money stops flowing. But if you encounter a problem, if you delay the project for another 3 years, the government pays you to fix the problem and then pays you a bonus profit on top of the cost of the fix. The legacy aerospace giants are literally incentivized to fail. There is no urgency. There is no hunger. Why finish the rocket in 2017 when delaying it to 2025 earns your shareholders another $5 billion? This isn't a business model. It is a parasitic addiction. And who pays the bill? You do. The NASA Office of Inspector General, the internal watchdog that Congress tries to ignore, released a report that should have ended the entire program. They estimate that a single launch, just one flight of the SLS, will cost the American taxpayer $4.1 billion. Let that sink in. $4.1 billion. For a single ride, for that amount of money, you could almost buy a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And remember, the aircraft carrier lasts for 50 years. The SLS lasts for 8 minutes before it crashes into the ocean. Let's look at the competition. SpaceX's Falcon Heavy, a rocket that exists, flies, and returns to Earth, costs about $100 million per launch. Do the math. For the price of one disposable SLS launch, you could launch SpaceX's Falcon Heavy 41 times. You could launch an entire space program for the price of a single SLS ticket. One is a reusable workhorse forging a path to the future. The other is a disposable relic built to burn cash. NASA defends this by saying the SLS offers unique capabilities. But at $4 billion a launch, the only thing it is uniquely capable of is bankrupting our dreams of exploration. This isn't just inefficient. This isn't just government waste. In a race against a superpower like China, who is building cheaper, faster, and smarter, this is financial suicide. But let's say you don't care about the money. Let's say you have an infinite budget. You still have to answer to the laws of physics. And the SLS has chosen to fight a war against the most frustrating element in the periodic table: liquid, hydrogen. To the average person, it's just rocket fuel. To an engineer, hydrogen is a nightmare. It is the smallest molecule in the universe. It doesn't just flow, it escapes. It leaks through microscopic pores in solid metal. It slips past the tightest industrial seals. It is the Houdini of chemistry. But the leakiness isn't the worst part. The temperature is. To keep hydrogen liquid, you have to chill it to minus 400 degrees Celsius and 23 degrees Fahrenheit. That is only 30 degrees above absolute zero, the point where molecular motion stops. At these temperatures, air freezes into solid blocks of ice. Rubber shatters. And metal? Metal suffers from a phenomenon called hydrogen embrittlement. The fuel itself attacks the structural integrity of the tank holding it, making high-grade steel as brittle as glass. We saw the consequences of this addiction to hydrogen with Artemis 1. It was supposed to be a triumphant launch. Instead, it was a summer of humiliation. Scrub after scrub after scrub. The rocket sat on the pad, hemorrhaging fuel. Sensors tripped, seals failed. The quick disconnect system refused to disconnect. While SpaceX was firing rockets weekly, NASA's flagship was fighting and losing a battle against thermal contraction. It got so bad that NASA had to send a red crew, a team of engineers, out to the launch pad while the rocket was fully fueled. They were essentially walking up to a loaded nuclear bomb, armed with torque wrenches, trying to tighten bolts that had shrunk in the cold. It was heroic, but it was also pathetic. We are fixing 21st century starships with manual labor because we chose the wrong fuel. This is the fragility of the system. While NASA was stuck plugging leaks, the rest of the industry moved on. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and even China have all pivoted to methane. Methane is denser, it is easier to handle, it doesn't require temperatures near absolute zero, and crucially, you can manufacture methane on Mars. Hydrogen? You can't found a civilization on it. It's too hard to store. So why? Why did NASA stick with this logistical nightmare? Because that's what they used in the 80s. Changing the fuel would mean designing a new engine. Designing a new engine would mean firing the old contractors. And firing the old contractors is politically impossible. So we are stuck. We are fighting a war against thermodynamics with weapons from the last century. And looking at the leak reports, thermodynamics is winning. And now, the chrome-plated elephant in the room, Starship. While NASA was busy gluing insulation onto 40-year-old tanks, Elon Musk was in a field in Texas, welding water towers into starships. NASA knows the SLS is a dead end, deep down. They know it. That is why, in a twist of irony, they hired SpaceX to build the actual lunar lander. But this decision created a logistical paradox that borders on comedy. Here is the mission plan. Try not to laugh. The astronauts launch from Earth in the Orion capsule, a cramped, disposable tin can sitting on top of the $4 billion SLS. They fly to lunar orbit. There, they meet up with Starship, a massive, reusable, luxury liner that launched separately. They transfer from the tiny capsule into the giant ship to land on the moon. Imagine taking a horse and buggy down the interstate to get to the airport so you can board a supersonic jet. That is Artemis. It begs the question, if Starship is capable of landing humans on the moon, if it is safe enough to trust with their lives in the vacuum of deep space, why aren't we launching on it? Why do we need the expensive middleman? Why pay $4 billion for a taxi ride when you already own the bus? NASA's official excuse is safety. They say Starship is unproven, but this logic is a Schrodinger's cat of engineering. They are saying Starship is safe enough to land on the moon, the most dangerous part of the mission, but somehow not safe enough to launch from Florida? It doesn't add up. The existence of Starship doesn't just complement the SLS, it invalidates it. It proves the obsolescence of the entire architecture. Every time Starship flies, it is a visual reminder that the SLS is a dinosaur, walking among mammals. In a rational world, the moment Starship worked, the SLS would have been cancelled. But NASA cannot cancel it. Because the SLS isn't about the moon. It isn't about Mars. And it certainly isn't about logic. It is about the contracts. It is about keeping the old space industrial complex on life support, fed by a drip feed of tax dollars, even if it means building a bridge to nowhere. We are witnessing the textbook definition of the sunk cost fallacy. It is the gambler's logic. I have lost too much to quit now, so I have to keep playing. We have spent decades and billions of dollars building a rocket to nowhere, and instead of cutting our losses, we are doubling down. Make no mistake, NASA's engineers are brilliant. The astronauts who will ride this candle are heroes, but they are trapped in a bureaucratic prison designed to burn cash, not fuel. They are the brightest minds of a generation, forced to build a steam engine in the age of nuclear power. If we actually want to build a city on the moon, instead of just talking about it, if we seriously want to beat China to the South Pole, we need to stop looking at the past with rose-tinted glasses. We need to let the old rockets rust in peace. Artemis might get us back to the moon, eventually, but at $4.1 billion a ticket, don't expect to stay. You cannot colonize space when the moving truck costs more than the city itself. This isn't a sustainable future. It is a theatrical performance. It is a very expensive flag planting ceremony. The moon is waiting. It has waited for 4 billion years, but our patience and our wallet are empty. So, I leave the verdict to you. Is the space launch system a national treasure that preserves American leadership? Or is it a $93 billion national scam? The comment section is open. Let the debate begin.